Welcome to Cyber Focus from the McCrary Institute, where we explore the people and ideas shaping and defending our digital world. I'm your host, Frank Cilluffo, and this week I have the privilege to sit down with two Northern Lights in the intelligence community. Laura Galante, who is the director of the CTIIC, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Look forward to learning much more about what CTIIC is doing and how she's moved the agency forward, as well as Lauren Goldman, who is head of Analysis and Analytic Integration at CTIIC, previously served in roles at the Defense Intelligence Agency as well as the National Counterterrorism Center. So two amazing women fighting the good fight, and really excited to sit down with them today. Laura, Lauren, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us, Frank.
So I think, so a lot of our viewers and listeners will have an appreciation and have heard about CTIIC, but quite honestly, I'm learning more about the good work y'all are doing these days. I thought we can start with its mission and specifically how it can help support our critical infrastructure community.
So CTIIC, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, it's a mouthful of an acronym in true government style, is just about to turn 10 years old here in February.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. And in those 10 years, just as the cyber threat has changed an incredible amount, so has CTIIC, right? And the way that you can think about the center that we've built at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence is that this is the integrator for the intelligence community's 18 agencies' intelligence that comes from a variety of sources, in addition to the private sector and commercial intelligence that is very much at the core of how the private sector understands cyber operations and cyber threat activity, in addition to other data sources that come in from critical infrastructure, from state and local operators, and what have you. So it's this focal integration point. But then what do you do with the intel? And this is kind of the core of where our team works, is that integrated picture to understand a cyber operation and cyber threats feeds the policy conversation at the National Security Council, in the Office of the National Cyber Director, and across the other policy agencies, so that they have the decision space for how they can use their instruments of power to hold cyber actors accountable and defend against these threats.
And I'm glad you delineated and differentiated. Intelligence is not policy. It supports policy and various decisions. So I think that often gets lost in the DC discussion. And just a fine point, intelligence is also in the estimating business. They're not clairvoyants. If we know everything, we're going to stop it. There's no problem, right? So
exactly right.
So I'd be curious in terms of where CTIIC is today, say 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Sure. So over the last 3 years, and I'll say I've had the seat of director here since January 2022. So in that 3-year period, we've gone from really wanting to do that sort of last mile of policy support that you're speaking to being in a place where we're able to do that decision framing, whether it's in an unclassified product, in a highly classified product, with a partner in a foreign country, or whether a private sector partner, and we're able to do that intelligence sharing and frame on what's going on to these variety of audiences. Now, the other piece that we've really kind of matured on is a partnership model. And I know the word partnership and public-private partnership gets thrown around probably, more times in DC than
I've often said long on nouns, short on verbs, but that's okay.
No kidding. But here's what this is really about. So inherent in the cyber threat and in the cyber domain is you've got most of the infrastructure owned by private entities, right? Your audience is going to know this really well. And the government's not responsible for net security support. We're not the IT guys for these companies, right? So you've got to find a way to pull that intelligence of where different operators are getting hit, different U.S. targets are getting hit, so that we can go and get the real understanding of the gravity of victims and what's gone on here in order to take action. And the way that we've done the partnership model at CTIIC is twofold. First is by acquiring cyber threat intelligence, so commercial intelligence that a bunch of the cybersecurity companies developed. I'm an old Mandiant alum, Mandiant, CrowdStrike,
APT1, right?
APT1,
which is
APT28
pretty awesome.
back in the day. These cybersecurity companies, really pioneered and developed the intelligence products around this, and being able to buy that intelligence for all 18 agencies, one way, accessible to everyone. Through something we called Sentinel Horizon was sort of the first step on getting that baseline, right?
Which is huge, by the way. It sounds so trivial, but from an acquisition standpoint, I'm sure that was a heavy lift.
Having been on the private and the public side, I'll say the only thing harder than actually making money in a company is asking for Congress to give you money, right? And do it in a way that makes sense for the interagency over time. So we've had a great, group effort for years to really get this joint acquisition together. So appreciate the
and not to belabor that point too much, but it also allows the IC then to really focus on the hard problems that the commercial sector can, right? Which could be all source intelligence. It's not only going to be through cyber means, but other collection as well.
You got it. Buy versus build, right? On some level. And if you can buy in an effective way, right, and make accessible in an effective way, one part of your intelligence mission, that gives you more freedom to focus on other areas, right? So that's been the trade-off.
Lauren, I mean, can you share a little bit and explain the critical infrastructure intelligence initiative that CTIIC is driving?
Absolutely. So as Laura mentioned, we're looking, across all 18 IC agencies, intelligence community agencies, and trying to find ways for us to, be additive to that mission. And one of the things that we found was that there's a lot of really great intelligence production that's happening at the secret level, and it is not necessarily always getting out to the edge. You mentioned that I was at CTIIC. Absolutely. With counterterrorism, we felt like the U.S. government had all of the information that we really needed. That's not the case necessarily with cyber. And so how do we work and have engagements and, with the industry out in the field? I'm thinking of like the water system in Idaho, and how do we give all the great tools that we have in the IC, all the great information we have in the IC, and get it out to those people who need it on a day-to-day basis?
And I imagine this is in collaboration with FBI and CISA in their and other sector risk management agencies?
In DHS-INA, the Intelligence and Analysis branch at DHS. Absolutely. It's DHS, FBI, CISA, and us, bringing the entire intelligence community together and making sure that we get that intelligence to the edge and get it to the people, into the hands of the people who need it.
And to both of you, how do you tailor that information? Because when you see a water, you've seen one water system, you've seen one water system.
Exactly.
Some are corporate, some are munis, some are government. How do you go about doing that?
Absolutely. Well, I was going to say, just as you mentioned, you have the New York water system that has billions of gallons that are going through it, all the way down to a water system in Kansas that's much smaller, where the gentleman that's running it, or the woman
that's
running it,
other jobs.
Has 15 other jobs. He's clearing the brush after the storm, and he's running the water system. And so, understanding the kind of things that they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis is part of the way we approach getting that intelligence that they need out to them. And like any good intelligence product, you look at who's the customer first and tailor it accordingly.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, let me just, water's a really good example because we've both seen a shift in the threat landscape where we had two actors in particular, an Iranian group and then a Russian-affiliated group called the Cyber Army of Russia, go after water systems in 2024 pretty aggressively across the U.S. and also at some global targets. And it gave us, in the intelligence community, two different kind of inflection points. The first was we have to be able to write for the water municipality in Kansas, right? We need to be able to fuel, whether it's EPA in the case of a sector risk management for water, right? But also CISA and what have you, with intelligence that their sector counterparts are going to be able to use, right? And that looks very different than what goes down in the president's daily briefing, right? That type of intelligence. But the other side that we really needed to look at wasn't just the format of how we fuel these agencies, but it was also who are the right partners that can scale an approach where intelligence is driving these insights around the threat, right? And we found that in some cases it's the OEMs, it's the original equipment manufacturers, especially in the operational technology space, right? The Siemens, the Rockwells, the guys who make the parts that
OT,
make
IC,
the physical pieces go. Yeah, I'd imagine you know a lot of these folks really well. The master service providers, the MSPs, right? A lot of the companies doing the actual tech work, and especially in this operational space, it's many times the engineering firms. And these are larger firms, but they're going in to make sure that the system works. They're going to be the person looking at that logic controller or at that human machine interface and saying, hey, is the default password still on there or not, right? So the example that we had is, we pulled together all of these different parts of both the technical infrastructure and all these different water systems, in addition to some of the communicators in the space. So the associations, the water sector, we probably know more on the water sector than we should at this moment, but
I'm happy.
They've got 7 associations, right?
Yeah.
That are really well known and trusted by a lot of their operators, right? A great place to push communications for threat activity and push communications for intel, right? So getting the communicators, getting the technology partners, and then getting the service providers all in line with the federal approach on this, and then having intelligence that really helps all these different parts of the system work the problem is what we've been piloting over the last year or so.
Which I think is essential because these are largely resource-poor critical infrastructure owner-operators. And I'm not picking on water, but if you were to compare sort of electricity and the utilities there, financial services, defense industrial base, they're at a different level of capacity and capability, yet the potential for risk to public safety and the like is pretty significant when it comes to water systems. One thing I'd like to ask, and I think unique in terms of the IC's role and CTIIC to enable some of that, I often say we see incidents in far-flung places of the world that will be a movie coming to a theater near you soon.
That's right.
So I kind of feel like when it comes to water, you mentioned the government of Iran, and obviously there's been a lot of activity in the Middle East. Do you provide intelligence and context around why some of this matters to some of our critical infrastructure owner-operators?
Yeah, that's absolutely what the purpose is. Because a lot of times what we'll hear from industry is, yes, I heard about this issue, 2 weeks after I saw it on my system, and they're just not tracking, as you mentioned, the context of what's happening. So there's a lot of really great work done by CISA, FBI, NSA at the fort, sending out information at the unclassified level of things, network defense notices, cybersecurity advisories. There's great information out there, but the feedback from the industry can often be, there's so much. How do I know what's important to me? Yep. And if we can arm them with the context of here's the intent behind the threat, we feel like that's a two-way street. We're giving them information, and then they can say, yes, we actually did see this on our system in a timely manner, and it's not too little too late.
And that's a way to build trust, which is essential, because every partnership is only as good as the trust between the various partners there. And I think that just adds a different level of value than most of them are seeing. They don't need another indicator. They do, don't get me wrong. We need all those, but there's more to it to see to see the whole puzzle. The Brits call it the rich picture. So sort of that conceptual sort of role. I'm happy you guys play that mission. And you also mentioned collaboration, and I think one of the big things that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but operational collaboration is sort of the name of the game now. And obviously that's not necessarily CTIIC, but it's helped set the stage for all of that. And I think we do have to get to the point where we think campaigns, right? I mean, we're really good when we have a run-up.
Yeah.
Russia moves into Ukraine. We're really good at how we support the private sector in terms of what we're seeing play out there, what the implications could be here. But it's in those other days where you don't have a run-up that I kind of feel like you guys can play an essential role. Fair?
Yeah, it's building that sustainment with engagements that are really focused on combining that operator set, the people who can do something about the threat, to the intel. And maybe to make that a little bit more real for a second, too. So, we keep talking about Iran and Russia threatening the water sector, right? Which is very much the case. our goal isn't to get the operator in, pick your state or municipality to think, oh, I'm going to be a target of Iran. We need them to secure the human-machine interface that they're using to control the tank level, right? Or
absolutely,
and just move off the default password, right?
Agnostic to who it is.
Agnostic to who it is, right? It's getting our private infrastructure more secure, right? And I think there's two pieces to this as well, which is, one, you have a lot of folks who don't think of themselves as a cyber person, who are there on the front line of securing a more and more digitized set of different edge devices, right? Set of these different technologies. And we're trying to figure out, and this is the active question. Frank, you've been around for a long time in these conversations.
I'm old.
It's the perennial question of like, how much do you change folks' mindset of the see something, say something, do something, sort of like we did in this counterterrorism post 9/11 world, right? To up physical and in cybersecurity game, right? But also to do it in a way where it makes sense within the scope of their job. You don't have to be a techie to do this kind of stuff, right? So this is why what Lauren's launching with this Critical Infrastructure Intelligence Initiative that we shorthand in government style CI3 is great. Because
that's a great acronym.
In CI3 is great because what you're really being able to do here is show how you can do the sort of counterterrorism approach of getting state and local all the way to federal and national security defense tied together, right, for cyber. And we're going to run on literally some of the same comms architecture that was built in the counterterrorism era in order to get that information out to the field, out to the operators.
So you're speaking my language. I'm skewed toward that. That's how I look at a lot of these challenges, and spot on. And I think you both made this clear. The difference is with cyber, companies are on the front lines of this war. When it came to the CT issues, it was how do we push the right information into the hands of state, local, tribal, territorial, whether first preventers, first responders. Here we have a huge audience. And what's even a U.S. audience gets confusing sometimes with some of the critical infrastructure owner-operators and companies that enable that. But I'm really glad you're taking that approach. Let's go to China. So you can't talk cyber without talking the Communist Party of China and some of their intentions. And we've seen Volt Typhoon, which to me is the most disconcerting. I don't see any value in terms of what they're doing from an espionage perspective other than to own a system and prep the battlefield for a time of their choosing. Then you've sort of got Salt Typhoon, which if I'll be very blunt here, telco's always said we got it covered. I'm not sure they've always had it as covered as they thought, but massive espionage campaign. Flax Typhoon, which is a little more traditional in terms of what we've seen. But again, the perpetrator by and large was China. Each one of these typhoons on their own is a really bad storm. Collectively, dare I say, it's almost a perfect storm. What are your thoughts there? And physical cyber in particular. And I've got to say, I'm amazed at how transparent the community is in terms of talking about. So if there's one silver lining in this storm, we're not guessing who the adversary is.
That's right.
But I'd be curious what your thoughts are there and what we've learned from all these typhoons.
Look, the China threat in cyber was kind of the first nation state pacing threat 15, 20 years ago, right? Where we saw particularly the PLA, but the Chinese military go after intellectual property theft of American and other global companies, right? So there's nothing new at Chinese focus on U.S. targets, right? What's really new here,
the tradecraft, right?
The tradecraft, but also the willingness to take actions that are clearly pre-positioned access to hold us in a position of advantage on the Chinese side, right? Whether it's military mobilization, whether it's to sow chaos and discord because the types of infrastructure is energy networks, it's civilian networks, right? And that risk calculus has changed for China. They're now willing to do this against the U.S., and we've seen these proof points over the last couple of years. And with Salt Typhoon, we're seeing a counterintelligence campaign, right? An ability to have an intelligence view into U.S. communications at a massive level, right? And when you zoom out a step, what the Chinese military and government's really been able to do here is they've been able to, over time, build a program that is able to counter and understand those main kind of chokeholds or choke points in the U.S. system that give them leverage to more. They're scaling their operations, right? This isn't the old days of APT1 where we would have 15 companies. We were one company responding to it. We would have 15 victims in a day, right? It was quantity. It was how do I get as much intellectual property as I can, right? This is targeted, this is specific, and the tactics that they're using blend in with the normal network activity of a network administrator, of a guy who's got to run the network, right? And the living off the land case. It's persistent. They're able to hold these accesses over time. So those are the fissures that make this really hard. Now, it's really easy to say, like, all right, these have been huge Chinese campaigns that have been super successful over the last couple of years, and they have been, right? But our ability to get insight into what they've actually compromised, right? Their intentions around this, and be able to put that picture together so that we can drive a better defensive approach and offensive approach has been the place where we've been really focused, right?
So dwell time is going down?
Well, it's not
at least by certain actors.
We are able to, the Chinese are outpacing our ability to defend against them.
The numbers,
right?
it's a numbers game. Yeah.
Sure, like these are huge compromises, right? The pre-positioning is an enormous advantage that they've got on our very porous infrastructure, right? So it's our ability to respond to this that is where we're just kind of crystallized and focused at this point.
And how are we working with our critical infrastructure owner operators specifically around some of these typhoons and campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, CISA's got the lead on the push out to the defenders across the community, right? And you'll see these cybersecurity advisories. My friend Dave Luber up at NSA will frequently remark, not only do these cybersecurity advisories are they fueled by NSA and FBI as well, but they've also got a lot of seals and badges of
that are not just Five Eyes,
services.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whether that's Japan, whether that's Germany, these are our allies who are experiencing the same activity and are also willing to put out and say, hey, this is an issue. And, for the deep, nerd followers of our cybersecurity advisories over time, you're also seeing us call out and characterize the activity and attribute it, right? There's no doubt about who this is or what the intent is here. And we're really diligent about trying to couple that with the actual iOS indicators and the actual network recommendations within the advisories.
And I am pleased to see the amount of logos coming from countries that you wouldn't expect. I mean, Five Eyes, that's one thing. That was great when we started doing that. But to see it expand beyond that, I think is essential. And quite honestly, having partnerships with these entities is essential. Where does commercial intelligence fit into all of this?
You beat me to the punch on that one, because I was thinking about, as we're talking about this, one of the things that's also super helpful as we're going after all these different typhoons is the idea that we can look at where this activity is happening outside of the United States and learn from where our commercial partners have insight into other geographic regions where we're seeing the same sorts of activity. So that helps us both an indicator and warning aspect of understanding what we can expect and what we can look for on our systems. But it also helps us be able to talk to our partners overseas and say, hey, we're seeing this, we understand you're seeing it as well. Can we talk about ways to combat it together? And I think that's, when we're able to do cybersecurity advisories at an unclassified level, a lot of that is due to the insights we're getting from our commercial vendors.
And I do give a lot of those cyber threat intel companies a lot of credit for being able to talk about it. I mean, when I was in government, I'd be wearing not Auburn orange. I'd be wearing orange if I had this conversation right now.
Exactly.
And it is quite amazing in a short amount of time how far we've gone there. And I think they deserve a lot of that credit for being able to push that needle. But again, I think it also allows us to devote our limited resources in a smarter, more targeted kind of way. One question, and feel free to punt on this one, but in terms of industry, if they have collection sort of priorities, whatever that may be, can you be their enabler?
the authorities are separate, right? In where, not to recruit too heavily for the IC here, but where the special sauce of the IC is, you get to do collection, operations, and analysis with the government hat on, right? And the government authorities that come with that. Where the cyber threat vendors are, that's really helpful, is they've got their own special sauce and how they're able to take metadata from incidents and other forensic pieces from detection that they have, and then explain the threat via those means, right? So different sourcing here. We're not looking in any way to blend authorities or anything to that. We are looking to blend our visibility. Right. And that's
which is all we need.
Which is all we need, right? Because there's just going to be times, and we see this not just times, every day, where the visibility, and I'll also count foreign partners in this too, right? The visibility in a certain breach, in a certain compromise, is going to be far better from the company whose technology was breached in some cases, right? Or the victim set, than it would be from another intelligence means, right? And we've got to be able to put that story together, and that's what we're actively doing, right? So it's that blend from a visibility and an analytics standpoint that's really where our focus is.
And again, you sort of mentioned that critical infrastructure, a smaller company, they don't need to know whether it's Iran, Russia, China, ransomware. At the end of the day, they just need to get the systems up and running. But you guys do, because every once in a while there will be a piece of the puzzle that perhaps we didn't see. Yep. So that's where it becomes important in kind to get both pieces of information, right?
And the relationships aren't just through the commercial model too, right? We've got all these voluntary sets of relationships with these companies too. Obviously, NSA's Cyber Collaboration Center for the Defense Industrial Base and
the
services,
gold standard,
right? Eyes. But the energy sector's just stood up the Energy Threat Analysis Center, ETAC, to do that. And then our friends over at Treasury set up the T-Suite last year. So, we're getting that Intel to Intel partnership, if you will, in some way, set up across the IC with different sectors.
Which is great. And all the agencies that are part of the IC, I get that. Treasury does have that OFAC mission, so they are part of the IC and it's some of those other critical, like ag. And when I look at the state of Alabama, dependency upon agriculture is so important in some of those issues. We got to figure out that one, I think. But it sounds like you're helping provide that picture. Well, let's sort of go to the future. And since the end of the Cold War, threat forecasting has made astrology look respectable. So I'm not going to predict the future, but we can in terms of the best way to predict it is to shape it, right? So tell me a little bit about the Cyber Strategy Board and how that's bringing the IC together along some of these issues.
Yeah, so you mentioned these different intelligence agencies, 18 of them coming together with different equities, with different authorities, right? Different powers, if you will, and visibilities. Yeah. Think of NGA, geospatial. They've got their eyes on a bunch of the, infrastructure, the literal physical infrastructure behind different actors, right? So when you blend these different groups together, that's where we get a much more holistic picture with the dependencies underneath cyber threats, right? And, to your point on future here, one of the pieces that I think people sometimes forget because they get so enamored with the sort of bits and bytes side of this is that there's a huge physical component, an energy component, frankly. And we know this so inherently with the AI and the chips.
And I'm going to get to AI, we won't let you escape.
I'm going to not try to be shut. But, the number of dependencies that different actors have as they build their cyber programs, but also as they operate, can be seen in these different, more physical realms, right? And that's where we need to kind of continue to position the cyber mission to be able to understand how those different pieces of data and intelligence feed together to give us a deeper picture into how the digital space is changing and how it's getting exploited. I think, if we have this conversation in 10 years, if, Auburn's still at it and this podcast, God willing, right? I think we're going to be talking about a digital infrastructure, and we're not going to be, cyber's going to be kind of a quaint term that felt like it was from the 80s, right?
Exactly.
Because we've got this, we keep talking about this fifth domain. We've been doing that for a long time, right? But this isn't just a domain anymore. It's built on, the entire experience, mind share, and economy at this point. So we've got to find a way to keep tethering all those different pieces of the story of the OSI model, et cetera, together in the intelligence world.
That's really well said, and you're hitting a wonky point that I don't want to go down too much
really
of
nerdy.
a rabbit hole, but it's true. It is its own domain, but it transcends everything. And not to be trite, but I almost don't care if we win the cyber war. I want to make sure we win the war. and all things said and done, is it a Russia problem? Is it a cyber problem? Is it a China problem? Yes, and yes, right? Yeah. And space is another area that I think transcends all existing domains, but is its own domain and has very unique cyber nexus challenges. So I hope you guys are doing some work in space, and I know we can't get into great detail on that, but I think there's a lot there. And I just think the way you think about it is really important. That just matches up with my own thinking. I'd be curious, initiatives like Intel Beyond the Beltway. So we talked about some of those sectors that maybe are not financial services, that has a strong SRMA that can jump in, and I don't want to pick on other SRMAs, but tell me about that initiative.
So the Critical Infrastructure Intelligence Initiative, the CTIIC, is one of the complements to Beyond the Beltway. And so, our goal is to work with our, FBI colleagues, our DHS colleagues through the Fusion Center, and again, get that intel outside of the Beltway. You mentioned earlier agriculture. One of the things that I think that CTIIC does really well is we have no pride of ownership. We are very much about finding the best athlete and getting that, person in front of the people that need to hear it. Everything we do is about tailoring the intelligence so that it is consumable, so that people get it and they feel armed to make the decisions they need to make. I think that
I'm really happy you said that, because that to me has been understanding the customer, specifically their needs and how they can act on that.
Listen, no one wants to be told how to do something that they've already tried, that isn't going to work, that isn't budgetarily, feasible. And so the last thing we want to do is come in with this we're the intelligence community. We come from DC to help, and everyone just kind of wants us to go out the back door. So I think that's where we're working really hard to understand the problem, understand what people need, and really meet the people, in the industry, the owners and operators, with information that they can use and feel like, again, they're well armed to be part of the national security problem.
And sort of physical cyber, that convergence, it's not a tomorrow thing. It's actually a yesterday thing, and it's a certainly here and now thing. And are you guys doing something to help sort of bridge that gap?
Let me talk about it in terms of automation for a second. Okay.
That's a great
So, and you're going to see me go back to agriculture. Not only did I wake up and feed my sheep on my farm this morning, but I think ag is a really, really key sector here, and has a lot to do, but also a lot of opportunity. So two of the big trends that I would say that have kind of fueled this need for a more physical security approach that we sometimes just shorthand as the OT-IT divide and improving OT. The first is on automation, right? You've had a ton of different pieces within industries that felt like older, more mechanical industries, right? Built on physical and kinetic sort of processes, manufacturing, agriculture, parts of the energy sector, et cetera, that went to a more automated approach that is now frequently online, right? Sometimes this is the IoT piece to what they're doing or what have you, right? And that's happened, of course, over the last 30, 40 years, but to a huge degree, especially over the last 4 or 5, as people wanted a more convenient way to operate parts of their infrastructure and supply chains and lines from home during COVID, right? And it also, the edge device production got a lot better over the last 5, 6 years too, right? So automation's been hugely tied to more digitalization and convenience, right? So that's a big edge attack surface that has existed at scale a lot more.
And some of those devices are 30 years old though, right?
Sure, but a lot of those devices are
Brand
new
new.
ways to control the old
Old
30-year-old one,
devices.
right?
Yeah, no,
Right?
well said. Yeah,
Right?
yeah, no, that's the
So-
truth. That's the IoT. Yep,
That's
yep.
the IoT, right? And then the other side, and hospitals have really dealt with this one. And we had HHS come out to our IC security board the first time Health and Human Services,
Great.
I think, had looked
Great.
everybody in the IC and the I.
Yep.
Right?
We just had the Health ISAC on our
Good.
podcast.
Yeah. I mean, they've been busy and they've really been hammered by ransomware. And a big piece of that, too, was how much medical records and other digital processes within the healthcare sector had to go online during COVID, too, right? These all seem mundane, but it really multiplied the attack surface.
Absolutely.
And actors have figured out how to play with it, right? And that's where we need, I think, some smart thinking of people who are deeply in these automation spaces, right? It's not just the Dragoses of the world, the security companies dealing with OT, but it's also the manufacturers who are that endpoint, who really need to help us think through how do you make it so that the default password you get to sign into once and then you've got to reset it. Or, it's not that simple, but we've got to think of security on the edge of these devices.
Phil Venables was on, and that was the point he was making extensively on one of our recent podcasts. I do think secure by default and all those sorts of issues. We've been very involved in cyber-informed engineering, which was more the ICS, OT side. So I think there is a lot of there.
Yeah.
The problem is that's not a tomorrow solution. That's a 5-year solution if we're really focused on sort of getting to the moon. Let me ask a question that, again, feel free to punt. Undersea cable. That's kind of freaky, isn't it?
Well, and in the last
it's
couple
happened
weeks
for a
here,
while, but
we
it
had
seems like it's happening
undersea
more.
Cable cut.
Yeah.
I mean, again, back to the physical infrastructure of the internet,
Again.
right? Like, in data centers are a piece of this too, and obviously the conversation around how you get mesh networks and satellite for resilience is a big piece.
We're good
of this.
there. We're not as good down there, right?
Well, it's a lot easier to mess with an undersea cable on
Yeah,
some degree when you can
yeah.
have a. I'll tell you, we've done a lot of work with foreign partners who ask us, they're at depending on where they are in their kind of journey on building a cyber intelligence program, they're frequently coming to us as an integrator and saying, who do I buy? Like, what companies do I buy? Or like, how do I set up a program, right? And when they're thinking about a program in 2024 and into 2025, they're thinking, how do I understand threats like undersea cables? How do I understand the maritime domain and how it's going to intersect with my ability to stay online and communicate, right? And taking that broader approach to building a program that has a physical layer to it. And I think on some levels, there's unmet demand on that part of the intelligence picture, on that commercial intelligence side.
And the broader maritime issue, I mean, we've paid attention to ZPMC and some of the but it's much bigger than just that, because when you actually look at it from a DoD perspective, it's really about mission assurance. It's the same thing we're seeing with both Typhoon and Guam. If we can't deploy forces or project power or get from A to B or get food from A to B, kind of at a disadvantage, right?
We always talk about this first mover advantage for a conflict,
and
right?
the initiative still remains with the attacker? Or do you see a day where blue...
Well,
I'm going to get to the AI question.
Okay.
So.
No, I think we're always going to have the paradigm in any sort of who's the offender, who's the defender game, right? Where somebody's going to make a move that precipitates a cascade of events that come from there. And whoever makes that move, first mover advantage, in your standard kind of poli-sci framework here, it's very much the same case that we're seeing and how that would happen in a cyber conflict and what we need to do. I'm just going to go where I think you're going to go, and then you tell me if it's not, Frank. On the AI piece, what I think we're particularly challenged by is if you can automate the next 2 or 3 decisions after you make the first move, right? And I'm using automate in a very almost
adversarial AI
way,
perspective,
right?
Yeah.
You can stack that first mover advantage into multiples so that you've got only mover advantage, right? And you've got
and if you get burnt, it doesn't matter, right?
Right, because you've now taken such an advantage that you've changed the decision calculus for your adversary. And that's where I think we've got to find better ways to try to limit that first move and limit and understand what that cascade would look like.
Because it has an X, it has multiple orders. Do you think, though, I've had a bunch of, and I've asked a bunch of different people on this particular show. Many are long AI playing to the blue, the defender. Do you all see that?
Absolutely. I think that the interesting thing for us, because where you sit is where you stand on the analytic problem for us on AI, is that what we hear a lot is, eventually this will replace analysts, and we will no longer have a seat at the table because AI will take care of it. And maybe it's just because I am an analyst at heart. I'm less worried about that, because I do think that we're not there yet, and that's something maybe in time perhaps, but we're not there yet. And I look at the kind of talent that we have in the intelligence community, and even with our commercial partners as well, and our foreign partners. And I think that we have a strategic advantage in that we come in with the critical thinking skills, the ability to communicate, the key points and of any issue in a way that's salient, in a way that lands with the customer, whether that customer is an owner-operator in Kansas or someone in the Beltway through a written product and a PDB at the classified level, right? And so I think I look at the way we aggregate all of the intelligence, and AI is not there yet. I look at the great product that we do that helps at the unclassified level, that helps people understand the threat, that and their risk. And I just don't think that we're quite there on the AI side.
Good. But commercial providers are doing a lot from the defensive perspective, looking at AI to try to get out in front of it. But it's not a race we can afford to lose. So
exactly.
We're never going to say, check, we're there. So at least I hope not. I'm going to ask an unfair question, and then I'm going to close it in a second. But do we need red lines in cyber? I know that's a bit of a policy question, but say we do have policies in place. I would argue maybe Typhoon was a red line that was crossed, but that's a different conversation. Would we be able to support the policymaker if we had red lines in place to clearly delineate when something's been crossed?
Look, I think this is about the practice of policy on how these lines develop, right? This is such a factually dependent space when you've got cyber operations that cross into public and private domains where you've got to infer, and in some cases we have very solid inferences, right? This is intelligence at the end of the day, for what these different activities are that we're able to detect and understand, right? And Typhoon, for example, is pre-positioning for no other reason but to attack critical infrastructure, right?
And in strategic locations.
And in strategic civilian locations and military locations, right? And that's unacceptable, right? And that's what the director of FBI, the head of CISA, that's
pretty much
what
everyone.
The U.S. government has
Unanimous.
called out, right? So that is very much, the discussion of like, when we've seen this, we have really called it out, right? So,
and I give the IC a lot of credit for that.
Well, and
policymakers.
Look, the IC, it lives on the darker side of the fence. We don't, we're not looking for the accolades. What we are doing though is we're making sure it's really clear to the best of our ability and visibility to understand that operation and that threat, right? And that's what provides the policymakers who have the really tough job of what do you do about it, right? Absolutely. The clarity to call out activity that's unacceptable and acceptable, right? And I think that I too like the red lines discussion because I think it
gets wonky fast, but it's fun.
All these policy majors at a table together, but in foreign affairs. But like this is about practice. Like that's where we are in this domain, and I think it's where we're going to continue to be. And if we look back 10 years, you probably remember all these cyber norms discussions too. Like. Some of it holds up, some of it doesn't. And that's because the threat changes this quickly.
I just worry that the lines in the silicon, if we want to play on a cyber, until we start defining some of that, we shouldn't act surprised when we see the same movie over and over and over and over and over. And it's not to be frustrated because, the flip side is we're getting it earlier.
Right.
That's a good sign. Doesn't mean that the adversary is stopping. And until we can induce changes in behavior, we will continue to see this. And that's a hard set of questions. So let me close with, what questions didn't I ask that I should have? I jumped all over the place. You guys are the pros. So what didn't I ask that I should have?
So one of the things that a couple years ago now, I would say about 3 years ago, we had a question from the White House, from the National Security Council, of how can we help from an intelligence community perspective, an intelligence product perspective, how can we help other countries understand that ransomware is a problem for everyone? Mm-hmm. And so they came to us this question. It was part of the Counter Ransomware Initiative, the CRI, the White House is running under DNSA News and Neuberger. And they came to us and said, could you just maybe come up with a map that says, like, look at all the places that have been hit by ransomware. And I said, that's a great idea. I love that. But, based on our data, which we partner with our commercial vendors to get unclassified data that helps us kind of look at ransomware trends over time, to give a little bit of a quantitative look of, like, is it up? Is it our policy, actions happening? Are takedowns of ransomware groups, are they actually having an effect? Or how long does that effect last before we start seeing them rise again? What sectors are being hit the most, so we can focus our efforts there from a policy perspective. So I said, that map is just going to be a big red map. And so what we, I was like,
one big red blob.
I was like, I don't know if that's really the story you want to tell. And so we worked with our cyber design studio at CTIIC, which is some of the best visual artists and graphic designers.
That's a good group.
Yeah. Like they're the absolute best. And that's one of the things that we really try to do is tell some of these stories in a way that are pictorial,
ultimately
so that
resonate.
And they resonate because you can remember a picture, right?
Yep.
And so we worked with them, and instead of doing just the map, we did trends over time, and we also broke it down by regions and by sector. And so we showed where, for example, what my story I always tell people is, like, if I am from, a country in South America, and I'm sent to DC to understand, what the U.S. is thinking through the CRI, the Counter Ransomware Initiative, I want to come back to know, what groups are hitting the region according to the U.S. What sectors are being hit? Is it agriculture? Is it our commercial sector? And so we told in this graphic a way, we broke it down by regions. We had, like, North America, South America, Europe, and we were able to show, here are the ransomware groups that are targeting each region. Here are the sectors that are mostly being hit. And then, the best thing is then we got to have a dialogue with these countries when they come for the big summit every year. We get to present our findings and say, what do you all think?
Did you support Costa Rica when they had their big?
CTIIC did not, but I know that there were a lot of our government, like CISA and FBI and all that stuff.
Yep.
It was a big effort, and I think that's where we can be additive from CTIIC, is we use that because that graphic, which is on our website, is unclassified, and you can go look at the trends over time. You can better understand, what we're seeing, the evolution of ransomware, and again, it's quantifiable, not just quality.
And bringing analytics and data and to this fight, empirically based evidence, I think, is essential.
Well,
the problem is, though, I think every sector is going to be, it may not all be red, but every sector is going to be a little red.
Well, every sector is going to be a little bit red, but, like, some sectors are smaller than others. So, like, if I only have, finite resources to dedicate to the ransomware problem, I'm going to focus on, my commercial or my healthcare or, that kind of thing. And to your point, like, I think intelligence sometimes can feel a little bit like gut check. And to have that data behind it, it really helps us tell a compelling story of, like, this seems to be working. This is where we see the trends changing over time.
Great story. Laura, anything I didn't ask that I should have?
One trend on ransomware that we found through doing the work that Lauren was talking about and bringing this private sector data with our own holdings together to understand who was getting hit is we saw a commonality between the healthcare sector, education, and then manufacturing getting hit about the same time. Yeah. And what the commonality seems to be is these are different companies and sectors, especially with education, where their uptime, their operations must go on. Kids got to go to school the next day, right?
Yep.
And it's, and it was
surgeries
911 lines, right?
Yep.
And it was, guess who pays? The people who got to get something back online tomorrow, right? So through a lot of this trending work, we were able to really find those sort of pinpoints that allowed us to be able to message, find the right sectors, figure out who's really in the bullseye.
Which gets the cross-sectoral importance and speed to get that information out. I think you probably also found that many of them were operating out of safe haven countries we don't have extradition treaties with. Fair?
Very fair. A lot of this
Another
is
policy
Russia-based.
question.
A lot of it's Russian-based.
Yeah.
Look, which is what makes this really hard to deter. But, the other side, and I think there's other actors besides the ransomware actors that have picked up on this. But, if I named Conti, years ago, or Black Bostar, right? And you could name these different ransomware groups. These are leopards changing their spots, right?
And there are others going to surf in their wake anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to use
There's
their
an
noise
affiliate
to
model here, right?
Yep.
So, so how these guys reconstitute and change, and then what operations, to Lauren's point, really throw sand in the gears and slow them down or change what they do, is where the intel community is able to provide value in tracking them.
Lauren, thank you so much for spending so much time with us. This was a wealth of information, and most importantly, thank you for your service. Thrilled to have two incredibly bright, smart, and dedicated public servants moving the ball. So thank you very much.
Frank, thanks a lot.
And before I leave, a token literally and figuratively of my appreciation, our coins.
Very cool.
Thank you both.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cyber Focus. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. Your ratings and reviews help us reach more listeners. Drop us a line if you have any ideas in terms of topics, themes, or individuals you'd like for us to host. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and stay curious.